Hey, hi, hello. It's time for another episode of Austin Archer's YouTube exclusive content.
YouTube exclusive content.
So, okay, hi, hello. Today on the program, we'll be talking about episodic, serialized storytelling and unresolved endings, as I'm sure you could tell by the title of the video. So what is serialized episodic storytelling? What am I talking about when I talk about that? Well, you know, it's stories that take place in multiple episodes. It's a series of episodes that all come together to tell one big cohesive story. And this is obviously not a new concept. Episodic storytelling has been around in television for as long as there has been television. It's been around in books and novels for a very long time. It's been around in the theater for a very long time. Even Shakespeare was getting down on some episodic, serialized storytelling with things like Henry IV Part 1 and 2 or Henry VI Parts 1 through 3. And it definitely exists and has existed for a long time in movies, in films, in cinema. But there's this idea out there that I want to talk about that exists in some circles of film critics and people who do commentary about film on the internet. And it's this idea that basically says that if a film is going to be episodic, or if a series of films are going to be episodic, in order to be considered good films or good cinema, each film in that series should exist as its own standalone, complete, resolved story within the franchise or within the series. The storytelling that's going on in each individual film can't rely on the other films in order for it to work as its own standalone film. Each film needs to work as its own film and also work to serve the greater story being told with the larger collection of films. And that's kind of what I want to talk about in this video. Like, yeah, sometimes having each film in the series be its own contained story is a good formula and serves the overall story being told. Take Back to the Future, for instance. That's a trilogy of movies where each individual film in the series is its own contained storyline. The continuity between the films is the characters and the settings and, the DeLorean. But each individual film is its own standalone film that could work independent of the others. Like, the story of Back to the Future is that this teenager in high school who's best friends with an old man, and we don't know why, don't ask why, nobody knows why, they're just best friends, and that's part of the charm of the film. He winds up going back in time 30 years to 1955 in this time machine that his old man best friend built, and he accidentally messes up the timeline by making his mom fall in love with him instead of his dad. It's a weird story, but the stakes of that story are that if he can't get his mom to fall in love with his dad, then he and his brother and sister are going to cease to exist. And he's looking at this photo of them from 1985, and they're slowly disappearing, and he knows that he's got to fix the timeline so that that photo gets fixed, and him and his siblings can be alive, and him and his mom won't be in love with each other in 1955. And by the end of that movie, he succeeds in doing that. He gets his mom to fall in love with his dad the way that she was originally supposed to, and the photograph gets fixed, and everything's all tied up, and he gets in the DeLorean time machine that his old man best friend built, and he goes back to the future, which is the present, which is also actually 40 years in the past currently. But yeah, the story of movie one is wrapped up, and then there's just a cliffhanger ending where the doc shows up and he says, "No, we got a problem in the future with your kids. You got to go into the future with me and fix this problem." And they fly off into the future, and it says "to be continued. Come back next week on Back to the Future 2. But you see what I'm talking about. Each movie in this series is its own contained film, and there are aspects of these films that bleed into each other and that serve each other to make the overall trilogy stronger, but each individual installment is its own contained little story, little adventure. And I love the Back to the Future movies, as weird as they are. They're classics. But just because that's the formula they went with for their series of episodic films doesn't mean that that's the only way that episodic filmmaking can be done. I've talked in another video about how one of my favorite film trilogies of all time is the Before Trilogy by Richard Linklater, starring Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. In that trilogy, each movie is definitely its own thing. The first movie is these 20-somethings who meet on a train and wind up having a really romantic night in Vienna. The second movie is those same people 10 years later meeting up in Paris, and it's the first time they've seen each other in 10 years, and they decide to take a chance on the feelings that they felt 10 years earlier in Vienna. And the third movie is 10 years later again. Those people are now a couple. They've been together for 10 years. They have twin daughters, and it's them navigating a long-term relationship. But the endings of all three films are incredibly unresolved and incredibly vague, and it's one of the things that I love the most about the trilogy. At the end of the first film, the two lovers can't decide if they want to be together or not. It kind of feels crazy. They've only known each other for about 24 hours, but they feel this incredible connection to each other, and they decide that they're going to meet up in 6 months back at this train station and give it another shot and see if the sparks start to fly again. But after they make that plan, the movie just ends. We don't get to find out if they actually go back and meet up with each other 6 months later. And it's not like a Back to the Future to be continued thing shows up. Nothing happened. The movie just ends, and it just ended like that in the 90s, and nobody knew that there was ever going to be a second or a third, because why would there? It was just this like really small indie movie about these two people having a nice day in a beautiful European city. Why would a movie like that be part of a trilogy? No one expected it to be. And then 10 years later, the second movie comes out, and that's when we find out that no, they never did go back 6 months later and meet each other at that train station. And this day in Paris is the first time that they've seen each other in 10 years since that last night. So we're finally getting some questions answered. Some of those unresolved questions from movie 1 are finally being answered, but like 10 years later. And then movie 2 ends, and we have to decide again. These two lovers have to decide, are they going to be together? And there's complications, because at this point, Ethan Hawke's character is married and has a kid, and he lives in New York. He doesn't live in Paris where Celine lives. And at the end of the movie, he's supposed to catch a flight to go back to his wife and kid, and he decides not to catch his flight. He decides to stay in Paris, and that's how the movie ends. Seems pretty wrapped up, right? Yeah, but there's still a lot of unresolved questions, like, okay, what's he gonna do about his wife and his kid? Is he gonna get a divorce from his wife and now live in Paris with Celine? What happens to his son? Does his son come and live with them in Paris, or is his son splitting custody between Paris and New York? There are a lot of like pretty complicated, unresolved threads at the end of that movie. And again, there's no to be continued at the end of the movie. It's not like, hey, next summer we're going to have the epic conclusion to this trilogy you've all been following, so don't worry, we're going to answer all of those questions. Another 10 years went by before we got the answers to any of those questions. And we find out in movie 3, 10 years later, they are together now. They're not married, but Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, their characters, are together. They have twin daughters. Even at the end of the third movie, this is the end of the trilogy. This is the end of the entire, 20-year saga that it took them to tell this story. The ending of the third movie is not like, okay, now we're done. The ending of the third movie is like, we don't know if Jesse and Celine are going to stay together or not. It's very vague. There's a lot of questions about whether or not their relationship is going to make it and stand the test of time. And I'm not mad about any of that. As I've said, it's one of my favorite film trilogies of all time. There's so many different ways to do episodic storytelling. Sometimes the structure that people go for is a series of films that progressively get more resolved as they go. Think Lord of the Rings. I mean, The Fellowship of the Ring, the story of that movie is this ring needs to get from one place to another place place so that it can be destroyed. It's such a powerful ring that a team of people needs to be assembled to make sure that the ring gets safely from the one location to the other. And at the end of that movie, absolutely nothing is resolved about that storyline. Not like it is in the Back to the Future movies. Nothing is resolved. That ring has not made it from one place to the other place that it was supposed to get to. It's not even like halfway there by the end of the first movie. The team of people that were assembled to make sure that the ring got there safely, 2 of them are dead. 2 of them have been kidnapped. 3 of them go after the 2 that were kidnapped, and 2 of the others head off on their own into an uncertain fate. And the movie just ends, and it's like, yeah, you're gonna have to come back to see. You're gonna have to come back and see if the 2 that were kidnapped get rescued or not. You're gonna have to come back and see if the 2 that died really died. Are they dead? Or is somebody gonna come back and now be wearing a white robe instead of a gray robe? Who knows? And will the other 2 actually manage to get the ring to the place that they're trying to get it to? And guess what? It doesn't even happen in the second movie. They don't get it there in the second movie. It takes 2 whole additional 3-hour-long movies before that ring gets to the place that it's supposed to get to be destroyed. And it's a fantastic series of films. It's an all-time classic series of films. Everybody loves them. Nobody's got beef with those movies. Sometimes there are episodic films where some of the films in the series are their own contained storyline that feels really neat and resolved at the end of it, and some of them are totally unresolved and totally open-ended. You get what I'm saying here, right? There just is more than one way to present episodic storytelling. I just don't get who decided that there's this rule that an episodic series of films is only good if each film works as its own standalone film. That's just not the way that it's been done kind of ever. I mean, it has been done that way sometimes, but not exclusively. There are just so many examples where it's not done that way, and we're all fine with it.
What's your point, Vanessa?
What's the point, Vanessa, indeed? Hi, it's me again, and it's literally been an entire month since I started shooting this video, so my hair's a little longer, and I'm wearing a shirt that has an ostrich on it now, but it's still the same video. So yeah, what's the point? We're 12 minutes into this thing, and all I've been doing is talking about different ways to structure episodic storytelling at the level of cinema and films. So why am I doing that? What am I talking about? Why do I care about this? Why am I telling you all of this stuff? I really should probably start telling people like what I'm gonna do in the video at the beginning of the video so that they know why they're watching and like what we're building toward, but I didn't do that, so I'm doing it now. So for those of you who may or may not be aware, I am a professional actor. I've been a professional actor since I was 10 years old. I've been in a handful of TV shows and movies over the years, but I spent the last 2 summers of my life in southern Utah acting in the first 2 parts of an epic 4-part series of films. And the first of those films hit theaters about a month ago. It's called Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1. Maybe you've heard of it. This is Kevin Costner's passion project. This is his big 4-part Western epic series of films that he's been wanting to make for a very long time, and he's finally going full send and he's making them. So this is the part of the video where I have to say that going forward, it should be known by the audience that like my objectivity is going to be in question. I obviously have a highly subjective lens through which I view these films. I'm very personally invested in the success of these films. I really want people to see these films and enjoy them, in no small part because that would be good for my career. Like, it's better for me and my career long term if these movies are really successful and people really like them than it is if they just sort of come and go and then fade away into obscurity. So that's just sort of a disclaimer for this next part of the video. I am speaking as someone who has worked on these movies. I am speaking from a very particular perspective. And I'm aware of that. I'm aware of all of the ways that might make people not want to take my analysis very seriously. What I can tell you is that in 25 years, I've been in a lot of different things, and I don't always like the things that I'm in. As an actor, your job is to be in service of helping a director and a writer tell the story they're trying to tell. You are not the primary storyteller. You are a person who is helping to facilitate someone else's story, someone else's vision. And what that means is you don't always have a lot of control over how the overall product comes together and what the overall effect of the thing you're working on winds up being. And it's not uncommon for actors to work on something and then see the final product and be like, oh, that didn't really come together very great. I guess that one's just not a very good one. And then they just move on with their lives. But the experience of making the first two Horizon films was one of the most positive experiences I've ever had in my entire career. So I was really stressed out this year as we were heading toward Horizon Chapter 1 finally being seen by audiences. And it's honestly been kind of an emotional roller coaster, if I'm being honest, because the first thing that happened is this movie premiered at the Cannes Film Festival and it got an 11-minute standing ovation. And all of the initial reactions that I could find online were people saying things like, this movie is a total masterpiece. It absolutely earned every minute of that 11-minute standing ovation. This is one of the best things Kevin Costner's done in his entire career. And honestly, seeing that initial reaction, my heart soared and I felt like, okay, we're good. We're going to be okay, and these movies are going to be a big hit. But then the reviews started coming out a few weeks before we were set to release worldwide in theaters. And the initial reviews were mixed, to say the least. The initial Rotten Tomatoes critic score for like several weeks leading up to the opening weekend of this first film was just bad. It was like 25% for several weeks. Now, granted, it was like 25% with only 25 reviews total even being submitted, and that score over time eventually went up to 48% with many more critics weighing in. But I think that the initial score after the Cannes Film Festival being so low kind of sealed the fate of this film at the box office. Unfortunately, Rotten Tomatoes critic scores do have a lot of weight and a lot of power over what people are going to go spend their money on at the theater. And I could probably make an entire video about the pros and cons of aggregators on the internet that are trying to tell us whether or not a thing is good or bad, like a restaurant or a book or a movie or a TV show. On one hand, it's kind of nice to have a place where you can look and just see what are the majority of professional critics saying about this thing. But on the other hand, I don't know, it's kind of weird that like only 25 people had weighed in, and let's say 75% of those 25 people didn't really like the film, and because of that, millions of people decided they weren't going to go and waste their time giving the film a fair shot. Now, to be fair, most aggregators around the internet, when it comes to just what audiences felt about this film, skew positive. And there are way more people contributing to those aggregators than there are contributing to the Rotten Tomatoes critic score. With thousands of people contributing reviews on Letterboxd, the Letterboxd score skews positive. The IMDb rating gives the film about a 7 out of 10. So most of the critical aggregators you can find on the internet for this film skew positive. But it does feel like, unfortunately, the most important aggregator that most moviegoers and movie ticket buyers look at and put stock into is that Rotten Tomatoes critical score. And it does seem that this Rotten Tomatoes critical score has been kind of disastrous for this first film, and indeed for the fate of the entire series of films. When movie 1 was released on June 28th, the plan was that Chapter 2 was going to be released just 6 weeks later on August 16th. But Chapter 1's box office performance was so disappointing that New Line Cinema decided to delay the theatrical release for Chapter 2. Like I said, this has been an emotional roller coaster for me. It just keeps feeling like it goes up and down and up and down. Like recently it was announced that Chapter 2 is going to premiere at the Venice Film Festival, so that was some good news. I was worried that maybe Chapter 2 was just going to get thrown in the garbage. But yeah, going into the premiere of Chapter 1, I was nervous because these reviews were not great. I was intentionally not really looking at the reviews. I just wanted to watch the film and see how I felt about it and see what the experience was like for me as an audience member, just sort of letting the story wash over me in the theater. I was lucky enough that I got to bring a bunch of my friends and family with me to the premiere, but I kept telling all of them, I don't know what we're about to watch. I don't know how this is going to go. This could be really bad. This could be really painful and embarrassing, and I apologize in advance if it is. I don't know what we're about to see. And I'm very happy and relieved to say that I actually wound up loving this movie. I've seen it 3 times now, and I like it more each time I see it. But everybody that I went and saw it with all 3 times, kind of everybody across the board felt like that was a pretty good movie. I really, really enjoyed that. I don't know why critics are being so harsh with it. I even had one friend who acted in the movie with me who made the comment that $33 million at the box office for a 3-hour-long rated R Western in 2024 isn't actually that bad of a box office performance. And I think my friend's got a good point there. Westerns as a genre haven't necessarily been dominating at the global box office any time in the last 15 years. Add in the fact that it's a 3-hour-long rated R Western that's also part 1 of a planned 4-part series, and that could be a tough sell for a lot of audiences. Like Viggo Mortensen wrote and directed a Western that came out this year called The Dead Don't Hurt, and his movie only made $1.8 million at the global box office. But I do believe that this first film could have, and most likely would have, performed better at the box office if it had received a more favorable reception from the majority of professional film critics. And being the glutton for punishment that I am, I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know, what is it about this first film that critics don't like? I went looking and I started reading through all of these different reviews and watching different reviews on YouTube and listening to different reviews on different movie podcasts. I was looking for common threads, like what is it that they're all honing in on? Do they feel like the characters are poorly drawn, or that there's major plot holes, or that the acting is bad, or that the cinematography is weak? And the reason why I wound up making this video is because as I was scouring through all of these negative reviews for this film, I was kind of blown away by the general critiques that I was seeing. I'm going to take a look at this particular breakdown from the film review podcast Breakfast All Day, because this review sort of characterizes what I saw in general from the majority of film critics who didn't like Horizon: An American Saga Chapter 1. Before I do this, I want to say, obviously, it's totally okay to not like a movie. You don't have to like the movie that I was in. I don't even have to like the movie that I was in. Sometimes I don't like things that I'm in. It's of course okay for film critics to be critical of films. What's weird to me about the kind of critique that I'm seeing for this specific film is that I'm struggling to understand it. I'm struggling to make it make sense. It feels like all of the critics who are mad at this film have forgotten what episodic storytelling is. But yeah, let's watch some clips from this Breakfast All Day review, and hopefully you'll see what I mean.
My good friend Tim Grierson helping me out on a review of Horizon: An American Saga Chapter 1. This is just Chapter 1. Only we will be the ones to get the grammar and punctuation exactly right on these ridiculously long film titles.
So there's something that's going to happen a lot in this review, and it's something that I noticed in a lot of the reviews that I watched or read about this film. And that is where the reviewer just says something that is true about the film, and it's something that's totally innocuous. It's just a detail about the film that is true, but they say it as though the thing they're telling you is objectively ridiculous. Like, can you believe that this exists in this movie? But they're just saying a totally normal thing. So she's doing it right here with the way that she's saying the title. And I've seen so many reviews do this where they're like, Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1. Like, why is it so long? And partially, I can tell you, it is that way because audiences have been having a really hard time grasping the fact that this is part 1 of a 4-part series. So telling audiences that this is a saga and that it is chapter 1 of that saga is meant to inform them that they are just watching the first part of an episodic series that is going to tell a bigger story over the course of the entire series. Like, you could just call it Horizon if you don't want to say the rest of the title. A lot of people are totally fine calling Furiosa, even though it's called Furiosa: a Mad Max saga. Like, it just sort of feels like these critics are looking for anything they can to be like, can you believe how ridiculous this movie is? These ridiculously long film titles, as though they've never seen a movie with a title that has more than 3 words in it before.
I'm going to try to describe this to you in the vaguest way possible, because a lot happens. It begins in 1858, but most of it's like 1862, 63, and we have these various groups of people all converging on this mythical town called Horizon. It's the titular town. Deanna Miller and her little girl who have survived an attack by Native Americans. There's also Jenna Malone, and she is in Montana, but then she's in Wyoming and she's on the run.
Like, it's subtle, but you can hear in the tone of her voice how she's doing her best to make it sound like the plot of this film is way more ridiculous and convoluted and hard to follow than it actually is. She's actually doing a pretty good job of recapping the plot. But she gets to the Jenna Malone character and she's like, we've got Jenna Malone who is in Montana, but then she's like in Wyoming, and then she's on the run, and who can keep this straight? And she's trying really hard to make it sound like Kevin Costner has written this plot that no person could reasonably follow. Even though A, she seems to have followed it just fine, and B, what she's saying about the plot is not crazy at all. She's saying, we have a character who starts the movie in one location and then winds up in another location at a different part of the movie. At one point in this movie, James Bond is in Morocco, but then he's in London. Who could even follow such a convoluted, crazy plot?
This basically is television. This should have been television.
So again, this should have been television thing. This is a very common thread throughout all of the critics who did not like this movie is this should have been television. There's just too many characters, too many locations, too many storylines. This would have worked better as television. They're just commenting on the fact that the film is structured in such a way that it feels like long-form episodic structure, which is what it is.
The television thing, I think, is real. My sort of pithy comment I made to myself after I walked out of the theater was, the first season of Horizon's a little slow, but if you stick with it, the second season's really great because it kind of does feel like we are setting up a lot of things that will potentially pay off or be more interesting in the second episode of this saga. But it does feel like there's a bunch of different strands of a much bigger plot.
So this is what I mean when I say that a lot of the reviews that I've looked at are critics who are just sort of stating innocuous facts about the film, but saying them as though it should be self-evident why that's a bad thing. Like, he says, this movie just feels like there are a lot of strands of a much bigger plot. And he says that as though it should be self-evident why that's a problem. But he's talking about a movie that he knows is chapter 1 of a 4-part epic episodic series of films. So he's just saying something that is true of many first chapters in many big, long episodic stories.
And so this movie, it premiered at Cannes, and I did not see it at Cannes. And I talked to colleagues who had seen it. And I said, so how was it? The two things they said, independently of each other, number one was, Kevin Costner doesn't show up for an hour into the movie, which is accurate. And the other one is, there's a huge sizzle reel at the end of the movie. And that's also accurate.
Hi, it's Austin who's editing the video. I wasn't going to mention this part, and I didn't mention it when I was filming, obviously, but I actually think I want to jump in here and say something. Again, he's just saying innocuous things that are true about the movie and not bothering to explain why these things are a problem for the film or how these things hurt the film. But he's delivering this information as though it should just be self-evident why this is bad. Like that, obviously it's really bad, and all of his colleagues agree, obviously, that it's a problem for this film that Kevin Costner doesn't show up until an hour into the movie. Well, it's an ensemble movie with lots of characters. It's a big, sprawling story across a very big map with lots of different locations and lots of different storylines. And the first hour of the first movie is spent developing other storylines than his. Like, it's just not time yet for the storyline that his character is in to begin. And if you feel like there's a better movie here that could be made by Kevin Costner showing up earlier in the runtime, then by all means, make that argument. Articulate why you feel like that is the case. But don't just say Kevin Costner shows up an hour into the movie and leave it there and just sort of assume that everybody automatically understands why that's bad. Fargo is a 90-minute long film, and Frances McDormand isn't introduced until the 30-minute mark, a third of the way into the narrative. In Peter Jackson's King Kong, we don't see the title character, King Kong, until the 90-minute mark. Even mentioning this thing about the sizzle reel at the end of the film, this is a thing that's in the film. The film has like a trailer, an extended trailer for movie 2, because it was advertised as chapter 1 and chapter 2, so it's showing the audience, here's what's going to happen in the next film. But again, let's not act like this is the first time this has ever been done in the history of cinema. I have the same problem when people just say this movie was too long and don't bother to explain what they mean by that. Especially from professional film critics, I feel like that is lazy and boring critique. Like, you can say that a movie is too long, but if you are a professional film critic, I want you to explain why you felt that way, what you mean by that. Don't just say the movie was too many minutes long and that's too many minutes for any movie to be, as though all of the highest grossing films of all time haven't been 3-hour-long epics. Because there's just so much evidence of movies being that many minutes and being some of the greatest films ever made. I feel like when I look at a lot of these reviews, it sounds like critics are saying something as innocuous as like, you know, some of the scenes in this movie take place at night, and then they just leave it there. They don't give any further explanation. And I want to say, like, okay, yeah, it seems like you think that that's a problem, that some of the scenes in this movie take place at night. Could you explain why? Is it because, like, those scenes are hard to see, or does it not make narrative sense why those scenes would take place at night? And they're just like, no, it's just that, like, some scenes take place at night, and that is obviously bad, and I don't think I should have to explain why.
I wouldn't even say, like, this isn't even like an Avengers movie where it's like, oh no, half the population has vanished. What's going to happen next? There isn't even, I would say, a cliffhanger at the end of chapter 1. Really, it's just, we're stopping the movie here. Here is a sizzle reel of what's coming next.
All he's saying here is this movie doesn't end on a cliffhanger, and that's crazy, even though that's not crazy at all. As we discussed in the first half of the video, there are many different ways to structure an episodic series of films. One of them is to have each film be its own complete 3-act structure, its own complete arc, and to end the film with a cliffhanger. And that is a valid and effective way to present episodic story structure in films. But as we've already discussed, it's not the only way it can be done. The story of The Fellowship of the Ring is not complete at the end of the movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. It's not like that movie has its own perfect 3-act structure that's all resolved and then it ends on a cliffhanger. It just ends in the middle of the story. It says, come back next time to figure out what happens next. We're not done yet. We're just getting started. We're literally only a third of the way through the arc that we're building here. Same with Dune Part 1. That movie's not like, and that's the end of the story of Dune Part 1, and here's a cliffhanger to lead us into Part 2. They're just in the middle of the story. It's just like, yeah, Paul's whole family is killed, and him and his mom are wandering off into the desert with the Fremen, and you got to come back to Part 2 to see what happens.
And so you just sort of watch this for 3 hours going, okay, this is information that I need to know because it's going to become important down the road. But I'd never seen a movie like Horizon where this is this person, this is this person, this is this person's relationship to another person. Like you said, oh, these two characters are in love now, apparently. That's a thing that's going on.
And this is why I say that the critique of these films is so bizarre and weird, because he says, I've never seen a movie like this. I've never seen a movie that's just information that I need to know in order to understand the next movies that are going to come afterward. I've never seen anything like that before. You've never seen that before? You've never seen a movie that was just full of information you needed to know in order to understand the rest of the films in that film series? You've never seen a movie like that before? You've honestly never seen a movie that has information in it that you need to know in order to understand what happens in the other films? Like, he's just describing what a movie is, right? He's just describing what a movie is. Let's watch that one more time.
This is this person. This is this person. This is this person's relationship to another person. Like you said, oh, these two characters are in love now, apparently. That's a thing that's going on.
That's just what a movie is. He's just saying, like, here's this person, here's this person, here's this storyline, this person's in love with this person now, this person's mad at this person now this person needs to go to this place to get this thing, and it's all just information. But that's what a fucking story is. He's literally just explaining what a movie is, but saying it in a tone where he's like, can you believe this? I've never seen anything like this before. It's just a bunch of information. It's just like people and places and things and events and stuff that happens with the people, and like in a sequence, like there's these people and then they do this thing and then these people do this thing and then because they do this thing, this happens, and it's just a bunch of events. And it's like, that's what a fucking movie is. How is this a critique of the film? How is this like telling you why the movie is bad?
There's some entertainment, and I think there's more stuff in that I like than you did, but it is just like, here's just a bunch of stuff that is happening that you need to be aware of for things that are going to happen down the road.
Yeah. If you don't watch chapter 1, you probably won't understand what's happening in chapters 2, 3, and 4. If you don't read the first 3 or 4 chapters of a novel, you might have a hard time understanding what's happening for the rest of the book. If you don't watch season 1 of a TV show, you might have a difficult time understanding what's happening in seasons 2 through 5.
I don't think I was bored because there's enough stuff kind of going on. I will say this, and I'm curious how you feel about this. Complaints I heard out of Cannes was, you can't even keep track of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
I was, maybe because I'd heard that so much, I was generally able to kind of keep the storylines because there's enough famous faces. So I didn't find it like impossible to follow. I just kept thinking, when are these people going to meet each other? And they don't. There's no hint in this film because, as you said, it's like, this is happening in California. This is happening in Wyoming. This is happening over here. Here are all these characters. Here are all these different territories. Trust us. It's going to be worthwhile eventually.
He says, I just kept wondering when all of these characters were going to intersect with each other. And, just basic story comprehension, I gotta just like, throw a guess out there. I've read the scripts for these movies, so I actually know, but my guess would be, if I had never read the scripts for these films, my guess would be if these storylines haven't intersected yet by the end of the first film, my guess would be they're probably going to intersect at some point in the next 3 films. It's probably going to happen later in the story. But he says this thing where he's like, there's no hint that they're ever going to intersect.
And they don't. There's no hint in this film. There's no hint.
No hint.
And this is just like a failure of basic story and media comprehension. Because there is a very heavy-handed plot device used in this film that very clearly spells out to the audience what the very obvious connection between all of these storylines is. Now, on the one hand, you have the connective tissue of all of these different storylines being people who exist during the settling of the modern American West. But specifically, in this film, Horizon, An American Saga, Chapter 1, there is this thing that is used in every single one of these different storylines. There's like 4 main storylines that we're following, and in every single one of these storylines, there is a character who holds up a poster that says on it, Horizon, and it's advertising that there is land for sale and land to be had in this place called Horizon.
There's no hint.
Every single one of these storylines at some point has a character who holds up a poster and says, oh, look at this. What's this? This place called Horizon, which is the fucking title of the film. And I can't tell you how many reviews I've looked at that have been like, there's just no connective tissue between these storylines. When are these people all going to meet each other? How are they going to all meet each other? There's nothing in this script that even suggests a connection between them. And I mean, like, Homegirl in this review even says it at the very beginning of the review. She says this.
T3, and we have these various groups of people all converging on this mythical town called Horizon. It's the titular town.
It's the titular town.
There's no hint.
So even this woman who like hated this movie understood that the connective tissue between all of these storylines is that it's all of these people who are heading toward this mythical place called Horizon, which is the title of the movie. So as I've already said in this video a few times, I understand that all of this might be tonally weird to watch. And by all of this, I mean like this video that I just made, this video that you presumably just watched if you're now at this part of the video. Like, it might feel a little weird to watch an actor in a movie doing a YouTube commentary video about how critics weren't nice enough to the movie that he was in. And so I just want to restate at the end of this video that, like, I'm aware of that, and I get that this is not a very conventional video. I do think it would be more weird to see a video like this from somebody like Sam Worthington or Luke Wilson or Sienna Miller, but I'm not really on their level. Let's be honest. There's a reason why that Variety article said TikTok star Austin Archer and not TV and movie star Austin Archer. I do commentary on the internet, and often I'm doing commentary about movies and stories. And in this video, I'm not so much giving commentary on a particular movie or a particular story as I am giving commentary on the kind of critique that I saw about a particular movie. Because I don't know, I just kind of found much of the critical response to this first film to be kind of baffling and weird. And I think I would have had an easier time accepting the mixed critical response to this first film if I could have found a stronger foothold in what it was that the majority of critics seemed to be bumping up against. I honestly think it would have been easier for me if it just seemed like people in general didn't like the cinematography or didn't like the acting or didn't like the characters or the story, if they were really bumping up against the craft and felt like the movie was poorly constructed. There's this review from an audience member that I found on Rotten Tomatoes that I think kind of encapsulates the overall vibe of the critical response to Horizon, An American Saga, Chapter 1. Went with an open mind and reasonable expectations, but what a mess. Several storylines, none of which intersect. Am I supposed to wait for the second installment for things to come together and make sense? And so, yeah, I don't know. This is what I mean when I say that the response to this film has me kind of stumped and baffled. And this is why I went ahead and made this kind of weird response video. Because again and again, the prevailing sentiment seems to be that a bunch of critics and certain audience members went to go watch a movie that they knew was just the first installment in a 4-part episodic series, and their biggest complaint about that movie is that the story wasn't finished at the end of the movie, that there was just like more story to be told by the time the credits were rolling. I find this to be such a bizarre reaction. It's like someone watching the first season of Breaking Bad and asking the question, am I really expected to watch the remaining 4 seasons in order to fully understand the totality of this story? And just, the obvious answer to that question is, yeah, yes. Yes, you are. Yes. When you bought a ticket to go watch part 1 of a 4-part series, you were signing up to watch 4 installments that were going to tell one big story over the course of 4 films. So yes, you are expected to see the other movies in order to understand the totality of the story being told. It feels like you're criticizing the movie for doing exactly what a first movie in a 4-part series should do. It feels like you're criticizing that movie for leaving you wanting more when that's what that movie should do. It should leave you wanting more. I don't know. I like Horizon, An American Saga, Chapter 1. I think it's kind of an amazing film. I think it's very, very well made. I think it's well written, well directed, amazing cinematography, amazing score, great acting. Sienna Miller is fantastic in this movie. Jamie Campbell Bower is really, really great in this movie. I kind of think all of the principal actors really bring their A game in this film. I also just feel like Horizon's the kind of movie that audiences should be supporting. It's an original film series with original characters and original storylines. It was financed almost entirely outside of the studio system, almost entirely independently made, shot almost entirely without CGI, on location with practical sets and practical action sequences. The Horizon series is the antidote to the incoming onslaught of AI-generated remakes to every studio's existing IP. And frustratingly, I feel like Horizon is the kind of film that in 5 to 10 years, everyone's gonna say, critics were too harsh on that movie. It's actually really good. And I'm just going to be sitting there like, yeah, it is good. And you know what? It was good back when it was released, too. It always was good. I sat there in the theater at the premiere watching this movie, and I gotta be honest, I was expecting to be let down. I was expecting to be disappointed when I saw that the movie only had a 27% critical score after the Cannes Film Festival. As the movie unfolded, I just kept thinking, wait a minute, this isn't bad at all. This is kind of great. This is the movie that I saw in my head when I first read the screenplay. Like, he pulled it off. The good news is it's not too late for you to get in on this series. You can still watch part 1 before part 2 comes out in theaters. And I do believe that part 2 will get a theatrical release after it premieres at the Venice Film Festival this fall. But you can watch part 1. You can stream it wherever you stream movies, on Amazon, on Apple Plus, and even here on YouTube. So, this is just me saying, I think you should do that. I think it's worth your time. I think that this full story is worth your time. I think it's very well told. I think it's very well made and well constructed. And yeah, that's all. That's it. That's the video. Hey, thanks for watching that. I hope you had at least a little bit of fun with that. Shout out to all my Patreon patrons, patreon.com/AustinArcher. If you want to support what I do here or on the internet, I would really appreciate your support because I am not a TV or a movie star. I am but a lowly internet commentator who every once in a while gets to play small parts in TV shows or movies. So I could use your support over there. And also, thank you to my Patreon patrons. Love you all so much. You're the best people in the world. And that's it for this one. Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye now. See everybody at the next video. Okay, so long. Goodbye. Look at this cool Chapel Roan shirt, by the way. That's 4 outfits in this one video. That's production value, okay? I'm doing big things over here.